hope you're doing well. So I promised to go live a while ago, about a week ago. I posted something that was about what you wish was easier in your singing. And I got a lot of different answers, and then I kind of said I would address all of these in a live. And I also posted for some questions, so I have some questions that came in today also about things that you want to talk about. So the first thing, I'm going to just dive right in to this, and the first question was about maintaining consistent support. And the first thing I will say, it's so easy, like it would be very easy for me to give a sexy short answer to this and, sort of be like, this is the way, this is how you do things, and then it's easy. But I will say developing consistent support is probably one of the most complicated processes, and yet it's so simple. It's one of those things that it's so simple that it takes kind of your whole singing life, or at least a really good chunk of your singing life, to understand what support actually is. And I will just say this, anytime you are being kind of taught to poke or prod or force or hold, that is generally not going to be where you're going to end up. But I'm also not going to say that that process doesn't help you figure out what support actually is, because I think it's kind of equally as important to know what support is not and what support is. So in the development of your consistent support, you may go a lot of wrong directions, and I want you to know that kind of none of them are wrong, because there are muscles that have to develop, there are a range of motion that has to develop. But essentially, like if we want to just break it down into simple nuts and bolts, and anyone who tries to tell you differently is disobeying the laws of physics. Okay, so this is very important that you understand just the physics of support. We have two small vocal folds up here, okay, in our larynx. And then we have lungs, right, which we breathe in, and our rib cage expands as our lungs fill. And then we can exhale and our rib cage collapses and the air comes out, okay? Now here's what you have to understand, and this is why I say you cannot disobey laws of physics. Because if you are somehow pushing in, right? So I know there's this whole in-out school. Kind of there is maybe muscularly, but there's not from an actual airflow directive. There's not two different ways to do this, because if you are allowing the force of the airflow to come up under the cords unregulated, you're going to have two reactions. You're either going to have a squeeze of the vocal folds to resist that hurricane of air coming up, or you are going to have the cords part. They're not going to be able to withstand that pressure, so you're going to have breathy singing, okay? So allowing your body to just kind of, right, allowing the air to sort of come out is just not the way. And any way of support that sort of encourages that, so like aggressively pulling the stomach in as you go to a high note, right? Now this can be deceptive, because in the process of developing your voice, you may find short term that doing something like that clears up the sound, makes the sound louder, more potent, more full. But that is kind of that's a shortcut to get there, right? And that's not the healthiest shortcut, because ultimately if you're training too much force up under the folds and the cords to kind of squeeze and react, and again in the beginning, before you've maybe developed that cord closure, that may look good. You may get more potent of a sound, more ring in the voice, and you might think, okay, this is the answer. I'm going to kind of squeeze in. But over time, that's too much pressure. Now, we do need correct pressure under the cords. And this is kind of what I want to talk about too, because airflow is not the same thing as pressure. And you can think about it as like a Coke can, okay? A Coke can has carbonation, right? And there's a certain amount of pressure in the can, right? So the can is pressurized, or hairspray. You can think about hairspray too, right? The can is pressurized. But actually, let's talk about hairspray. That's a little bit better. You squeeze a little bit, right? And it comes out. Now it's pressurized, but depending on how we're sort of like, getting the airstream going, whether it's one of those like skinny things that sort of spray in one spot, it's not really good hairspray if it does that, but, or it kind of diffuses around, there is either smaller airflow or bigger airflow, okay? But the can is pressurized and it's not increasing the pressure, right? It's not increasing the amount. It's kind of keeping that amount consistent when you spray your hair, right? So that's essentially what we want to mimic when we're singing. Now the pressure, depending on the notes, right? Higher notes require faster air, but not more air. Okay, and so that can be an energization of the air flow, but that is not the same as air pressure. So what we want to do is make sure that we're actually holding off that feeling of push from underneath the cord. We want to make sure that we are using our imagination, using our bodies to sort of decrease that natural effect of the body coming in and going, huh, okay? So as we go to higher pitches and the chords are thinner, they don't inadvertently thicken and squeeze, okay? So again, developing this is a little bit of a puzzle because you also have to put into play what's happening at the laryngeal level, because that is the valve that all of this is being controlled from. So if your valve is not correctly balanced, you can't correctly balance your airflow, and that is a problem. So whenever if you go to a teacher or you start working somewhere and it's only on support and that's all that they're talking about, that's a little bit of kind of a misnomer of things, right? Because you need to understand that it's all related. It would be so great if we could kind of separate out elements, and we can in a moment. Like we can separate an element in a moment, but we can't separate it out from how it's functioning from the whole. And that is the case with support. So support and that feeling of holding off is calibrated based on what is happening at the laryngeal level, whether our cords are thicker or thinner, and what the pressure system is here, right, underneath the cord. So that can't be dealt with in a vacuum. It has to be dealt with in terms of registration, in terms of phonation. So I will say that also. And in general, you want to learn how to stay open in your rib cage. So I like to go internal. I like to stop thinking about big structures. And this has been a process, right? When I was, teaching maybe 10 years ago or even 5 years ago, I was thinking about things a little bit more mechanistically, right? More holding with the body, the force of the body. But actually that's not accurate. It's not really accurate, because if you do that too much, there's too much muscle, right? And what I like to think of now is that we're actually supporting with the air. So the air in our lungs can expand, right? And it can stay. And I like to think that I'm almost one with the airflow. And again, this is a thought process that keeps me from muscularizing and creating too much rigidity in my rib cage, but at the same time allows me to keep that expansion in the rib cage. So I think about the air expanding and holding off and not allowing the airflow to go up under the cords. So that's a little trick of the mind that I like to play, so that I don't rigidify, but I keep that expansion of the rib cage. So that is something you're going to have to learn to do over time. It cannot be done like this. So just if you're having trouble with your support, know that it's a journey, right? Rome wasn't built in a day, but you must get the principles correct. You are working to keep your body open, to keep the airflow from pushing up under the vocal folds and causing that chain reaction of squeeze. Okay, so I hope that's a good kind of entryway into that discussion. We've got a lot of topics to get through, so I'm gonna try to be a little bit more brief on the next ones. Okay, so now we've got a couple passaggio questions, so I'm gonna sort of link them all together. One is about maintaining singing in the passaggio for a length of time. Okay, so that's a higher tessitura. I'm guessing it's the upper passaggio because she writes Norina's aria. So we will deal with the upper passaggio. And now we have a question about the passaggio between A2 and C#3. And I'm wondering if that's European denotation or what we use in America. I think it's European. I think that that's the high A and the high C#. Okay, we're going to leave that for a different question. And then we have just passaggio. So I'm wondering if that's upper or lower, but we'll deal with both. So first, let's talk about this upper passaggio. Okay, this upper passaggio and having to maintain a higher tessitura. So what are the problems about maintaining the higher tessitura in the passaggio? It is about muscular balance. And that is the long and the short of it. So what we're having to essentially do in the passaggio, which we are doing in the rest of our voice here, and here's also what I would like to bring attention to, because if you are not thinking about doing this in the rest of your voice, you're going to have problems in your passaggio. And, you know, I think it was Lily Lehmann, she writes in her book that, okay, there are registers, but if we're actually being accurate, you can think of every note as a separate register. And I kind of subscribe to that thought process. And the reason I subscribe to that thought process is because mentally it's a better plan. As you're moving up and down the scale, there is a different ratio of balance of our muscles that have to take place for the optimization of that note. And if we're grouping notes in groups, that's going to create a little bit of inconsistency and trouble kind of bridging that gap. So if you're thinking like, all right, I'm singing in chest voice and now I'm going to switch and now I'm in my middle voice and now I'm going to switch and now I'm in my head voice. You can see what that does, because where are you going to switch, right? Where are you going to decide this is the note to switch? And then if you think about it, the vocal cords are stretching at various increments as you're going up and down the scale, or, you know, stretching or decreasing, right? So they're doing this when they're doing this. And when they're doing that, they're scaling. So each note is a different length. If each note is a different length, there's a different amount of tension, okay? Tension meaning like good tension, like a rubber band stretches. With that mounting tension, there must be an equal and opposite reaction from the opposing muscle groups. So the two muscle groups right now that I'm talking about are the CT muscles, the cricothyroid muscles, and the TA muscles, which are the muscle of the vocal folds, the thyroarytenoids. So when we're talking about the pitch changing, it's the thyroarytenoids that are doing the changing, right? They're either tensing and they're shortening, or they are, you know, stretching, okay? So when they stretch, there's a different kind of tension, and when they shorten and thicken, it's a different kind of tension. What has to happen is the CT muscle, okay, this muscle that sits right here on the thyroid cartilage and the cricoid cartilage and kind of pulls the larynx. It tilts the larynx, and you can feel the action of the CT if you go, oh, 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 and you could feel that little notch right here, oh, oh, and you kind of feel that yawn, you feel that kick out. So what you have to be able to do is at the varying degrees of tension, you have to be able to resist in an equal and proportionate manner with the CT muscle. So as you're going up and down the scale, it's much of a game like tug of war. You know, like the kids play on the playground. One team has one end of the rope, the other team has the other end. Now, what ideally we want throughout our range is that no one wins. Okay, we're not letting any of the teams win, that they're equal. And the goal might change, but that balance stays consistent. So when we encounter, hopefully we're reconnecting. I think we're reconnected now. Okay, so I hope that you heard this part about the balance. So when we have passaggio problems, what that indicates is that we haven't balanced this muscular proportion across going up to the passaggio. We've somehow been out of balance. And this is really, really, really important to understand, because it is not a sudden switch that you just, okay, and now I'm balanced, right? So you're going to have to look back in the scale. And 9 times out of 10, I say that entrance to the passaggio. So, if we're dealing with soprano, because this question comes from a soprano who was singing Norina's aria. So if you're a soprano, you need to look at your notes like B flat, B, and C, going into the upper middle voice, going into the passaggio, because 9 times out of 10, those are compressed, meaning the pharynx, you're singing them with the larynx too high, and there's too much of a thick fold and there's not enough turn. Okay, so that's really important to understand, that the passaggio problems are a result of problems previous in the scale. And then, of course, in the upper passaggio, you have to be able to maintain that. So that does take some, I would call it strength in a way, but it's coordination, okay? I do call it strength because I do think that there is a bit of strength that has to be developed in the CT muscle, especially as the voice grows. And you may notice this, you may notice that, 5 years ago I had no problems maintaining this higher tessitura, and now I have tons of problems. That's because the voice got bigger, the voice got thicker, and you didn't counterbalance the CT muscle with the TA muscle. So you always have to kind of check in and balance the voice. And Birgit Nielsen writes about this. She says, like, every time her voice grew, she would rebalance her voice with the head voice. And she would go back to sounding like she was Terlina singing inside of her head, right? And I think that's a good direction for all of us. So in short, my answer to this question is that when you're talking about maintaining singing in the passaggio, if singing in the passaggio is difficult, you need to go back and recalibrate your voice, especially in the middle, in the upper middle, that entrance to the passaggio. Most likely you're singing with too much weight and not enough turn, okay? And that you will notice over time. This is not something that you can fix in a day, so don't go home and expect that this is the answer. It is the slow answer. Like I said, none of these answers are going to be sexy. There's one that could be an immediate fix. There is one coming up, but not yet. This is a little bit of a process. So you have to sort of be patient with yourself in working towards this goal. But ideally, singing in the upper passaggio should not be taxing. Maybe mentally taxing, because you have to be like, okay, this is the area where things are really balancing in a different way. You might have to be more alert, but it shouldn't be more physically taxing. So that's important to know. Okay, now let us dovetail with that and talk about lower passaggio, because there is another question that just says passaggio. So let's quickly talk about the lower passaggio with this, okay? As you're going down now, I'm talking to mezzos and sopranos and contraltos, so entering that switch where we're going into chest voice, right? This is really, really essential that we are balancing again, that we are not allowing the voice to sort of clunk down into chest voice, that we're maintaining that balance between our CT and our TA. Somebody wrote a question, by the way, I think about the last thing. What would be a good exercise for that? I'm assuming that's about passaggio, right? What would be a good exercise for that? Well, I think there's numerous things that it's not so much what is the exercise, it's how are you exercising that area of the voice. So if you're singing in middle voice, I think it's really important that you are practicing singing in the lightest possible phonation. High passaggio, yes. I wouldn't be practicing in the high passaggio. I mean, if you listen to the whole thing, right, I would say that you would practice middle voice and upper middle. And the way you want to do this is no matter what exercise you're doing, you want to try to scale the voice to the smallest possible sound that you can, but still be on the body, so that you're not giving extra air, that you're really singing with the thin edges of the folds. And if you don't know what that is, You can practice simple hum. Trying to make as soft of a sound as possible, that if you were on a train and sitting next to somebody, you know, trains are kind of loud, but you're sitting next to someone, you're humming so soft that they couldn't even hear you. And you practice that. And if you start to be able to do that through the middle voice easily, very soft, then you can start doing open mouth singing, but very soft. And we start to scale this. You can feel this feeling of like, very light, very light. So you get used to that feeling of no pressure. And then gradually you can add more and more voice, but the color and the texture and the turn of the voice are always the same. So if you feel it, what your throat does on an ooh, ooh, you can say ooh, ooh, right? And this is also a good exercise for this. You can do ooh. So you're keeping that tilt, you're keeping that turn, but you're keeping that light phonation, okay? And I like to start up to down. I don't like to start down to up because sometimes we can miss weight, okay? So really, really, really soft dynamic, practicing with the thin folds and the turn of the larynx. And as you get better with that, you can start to open that up. Right? And you can practice this through the middle voice, but I wouldn't do the full voiced one until you're very adept at doing this thin fold one. Because if you can't do that, that's going to tell you that why you're having high passaggio problems. Okay, now dovetailing on this, because we're talking about exercises, this is also the exercise you want to do in the lower passaggio for the same reasons, but kind of inverted. So going into the lower passaggio, your larynx is going to want to unturn and go into a kind of position, because you can just say, like in your chest voice, and you can feel that, right? So as we come down into the low, we want to be able to maintain the tilt so that we don't come on without that feeling of vocal protection, that ooh, ooh, right? So if we come down through the lower passaggio, ooh. Now you heard that I did change, right? But I didn't go and sort of raise my larynx to bring together the chest voice. So this is very important that you learn how to do this through the low. And that doesn't mean that you won't eventually get into chest voice. There will be a point where you're, right, but as I'm going up, I'm maintaining the tilt of my larynx so that I don't go, and then you get a break. But instead you get, seamless sound going from the chest voice to the head voice. And how I do that is keeping that feeling of yawn, keeping that kick out here. It's like, again, there is some strength that has to be developed. So if you're not able to do that, you want to practice these little things. So as you're going up through from chest voice up into the lower passaggio, you feel that you're actually yawning into that. And it's kind of counterintuitive, because we want to sort of unturn and give that belt sound position. But you need to yawn into that. And then that goes into that position, right? So that you don't go, larynx comes untilted, okay? So that's very important, and you can use the same exercise coming down into the chest voice with that ooh, and that will really help that lower passaggio start to join with the rest of the voice. Now we have one more passaggio question, and this is about the passaggio between A2 and C sharp 3. Now, because of the person, I'm pretty certain these are European denotations, so these are soprano high A and soprano high C sharp. Now, if you're thinking, is there a passaggio there? Yeah, there absolutely can be, because what happens, and somewhere in there, the the balance wants to shift, right? And again, I would say pretty much the same thing with the exception that C sharp, until you've really integrated the voice fully, what may be a safer practice is that at the point that it wants to flip, you start practicing this coordinated whistle. So you want to practice this oo. Again, oo is a great vowel when we're talking about passaggio issues and weight issues because it kicks out, it engages the CT muscle. So it provides some vocal protection so we're not bringing our larynx up and slamming our chords together. So on the passaggio between the high A and the high C sharp, you want to start to bring a little bit of ooh in that feeling, okay, that you're not going to this splatted ah position. Now, I do put a little asterisk on this comment because there are different Fox and there are different expectations for Fox. So a spinto soprano and a dramatic soprano have a different expectation on certain high Cs and certain high C sharps than might a coloratura or a lyric. So, and music also is different, right? So we have some piano notes, some louder notes. So everything is a little bit different. And when you think about dynamics, that is also registration. So there is a time and a place to have a little bit more TA action in the top. But in general, we want to start practicing that we lay out that and we train the support on the lightest possible configuration of that. So we start to reduce the vocal load. So a great exercise for that is to do this where we close to an ooh at the top. And what this will do is sort of force the voice into a coordinated whistle voice position. So something like this. So notice when I break off, that goes to somewhere else, like a coperto note, right? Like it's almost not a fully sung note. And that's a great exercise to start to practice up there. And that passaggio, you want to start, again, you need, if you're having issues and weight issues there, or switching issues, you need to look back and see what's happening in the weight of the full voice. So that's what I would say about that. Now let's move on from passaggio because we talked about that a lot. And I'm going to move into, again, moving into whistle voice discussion, which is kind of passaggio. There's a question about the difference between head voice and whistle. Because seems to be at this person's top, there's a lot of tension and she feels it in her neck. Now, if you feel tension in your neck, especially the back of your neck when you're singing, I can tell you 100% what that is. You are singing with too much vocal mass. That is always the answer. It's a wonderful way to sort of check yourself. Because if you're feeling that pull on the back of the neck, or you kind of feel that sort of feeling like, you know there's too much vocal mass. Now, the way to fix that isn't necessarily quick, like, okay, I can fix that in 1 second without, just sing lighter. Now, some of you may be able to do that if the technique is right and you just made kind of a wrong choice registrationally. So if that's the case, if you just are sort of normally singing easy and then you go to this one piece and you're having a problem on one particular piece and your technique's normally fine, just check how you're mentally approaching that because it probably is the case that you're just over bulking, right? But let's just say that this is a problem that you're always having, okay? And the person did not write what note they were having issues with, but they said head voice to whistle. So I'm assuming that the tension is sort of mounting around B flat and going up to B and C and sort of capping off so they're not getting access to that whistle register. So what I would say with that is this exercise that I gave right before, this reducing the vocal load on the oo can absolutely help that and sort of retrain that function. But another thing is that you're probably going to need to look at the rest of your voice because 9 times out of 10, that problem is not beginning on your head voice. The problem is beginning earlier. So I hate to be boring and sound like a broken record, but that's why I said in the beginning, none of these answers are simple and they're not super sexy, like, oh, do this one thing and it's fixed, right? you do need to sort of loop it back and see how you're balancing each note of the scale, especially in that middle voice. In general, head voice, like let's just say that maybe best case scenario, somehow your voice is really balanced. Okay, the person who asked the question, maybe your whole voice is balanced and you're just not getting access to the top tones because you haven't explored the whistle register and how that can sort of relieve the pressure off the voice. So if that is the case, then you want to sort of practice again with that ooh positioning, breaking off the voice, allowing that lighter mechanism to come in. And you can also practice with embouchure. Now this is not for every single high note, but this is to train in a particular direction. It's to bring a little bit more head voice function and whistle function into the voice. So if you keep this ooh position, you'll notice that ooh, it can shoots up there, right? And so you want to keep that general shape as you go up high, that you're keeping that oh, right? That feeling, not but so that will help to start training that. And if you don't know how to access your whistle voice, I just say play around. You know, you need to try creaky door sounds. I have a few videos on whistle voice. So if you want to know how to do this, go check them out. They're free. They're on YouTube. And I have like a whole whistle voice playlist. So if you have not been able to get your whistle voice to work, go check those videos out because it kind of walks you through step by step on how to find the whistle function in your voice. Okay, now we have, this is the sexy answer, tongue placement. One part sexy answer, one part long, involved, boring answer. Sexy answer is tongue placement. Back of tongue really needs to learn how to stay gently lifted and not pressing down in the throat. Okay, so the ideal tongue posture is tip of the tongue gently on the bottom teeth, a back of the tongue gently up. Oh, ee, hey, oh, oh. And contrary to what you might have learned in your, tongue positions for making vowels, I recommend that you have in your mind that back of the tongue stays gently lifted when articulating all those vowels. So you're able to go, with the same tongue position, that you're not going, that never made sense. Like why oh, ooh, it should not be, right? So you want that back of the tongue to stay high. Now, that may not be easy to do in the beginning, okay? And you may have to do a little bit of gymnastics and retraining, because what I'm finding is that a lot of people, it's not that they haven't been training for a long time, it's that they've been training muscles a little bit incorrectly. So sometimes when you learn about something like this, you go to do it and you're like, wow, Julia's crazy because this is hard and this feels more tense than I would want. But the truth is that sometimes things have to be undone. And so if your tongue is habitually falling in your throat, or you notice that it's kind of pressing down, right? That does not do good things for the larynx. And it also swallows up the vocal tract. So again, we talked about physics earlier on. If you think about the physics and the biomechanics of your tongue and how it's attached via the hyoid bone to the larynx, you will see that it is really a bad idea to allow that tongue to relax into the back of the throat. Now, relax has two different connotations, right? If you're in a posture that is ready for singing, and then you relax that posture, but you keep the form, that's a good relaxation. But if somebody says relax and your tongue goes, oh, this is not a good situation. That's not the kind of relax that we want to do, okay? The kind of relax that you want to do is when you finally learn the form, then you're able to find the relaxation within the form, okay? Because I'm going to tell you what my relaxing looks like on the couch laying down does not look like singing, all right? And I think if you ask any of the Olympic athletes now, that's not relaxation in your sport. So think about it logically, all right? Just use logic on this. Relaxing your tongue does not mean letting it fall down to the bottom of your mouth. Doesn't go that way. That's just physics. Okay, so tongue placement, if your tongue isn't naturally able to sit up, you're going to need to train it a little bit, right? And it can be because, you speak a different language, or I know sometimes actually American English speakers have a lot of trouble with this. So we sort of have to train the tongue position in a very systematic way. So doing exercises like things that train the back of the tongue to stay up. That you're learning to keep that back of the tongue and also phonate in that position. That's very important. And you can do, if your tongue just feels totally unruly, a couple good exercises that you can do for tongue tone, meaning just general like tongue strength, because the tongue is a muscle and a very important one in singing. So here's a great exercise. You can get to the sides of the teeth right here, kind of get the sides on there, and you find that point of contact. Once you find the point of contact, you start to bring the tongue in. So you learn how to kind of spread it out and bring it in, but on that track here. Okay, that's a really good, and if you can't do that, or if your like tongue is going all over the place, practice that in the mirror. That is going to do worlds of good for your singing when you have more tongue tone. They often say, like in physical exercise or the gym or something, oftentimes we have tense muscles because they're weak muscles. And I will say that is so true for the tongue. The stronger the tongue is, the less the stronger the tongue is, the less tension you have. Sorry, I almost clicked off my live, so I got distracted. There we go, we're back. Okay, so now the next question. Best thing to do, am I skipping over anything? Okay, no. Best thing to do just before an audition. Should the warm-up be the same or should it be different? Okay, very good question. I say it should be the same. And thinking even pre-audition, you need to develop a warm-up routine for yourself that is the same all the time. Now, that doesn't mean that you don't mix in some things into that, right? But you need to have a base routine. You really need to have a base routine. If you don't, here's why my argument for base routine. Meaning the same moves every single day, the same exercises every single day. Classical ballet has it. Why do we do it in singing? We do it, first of all, to develop control, okay? But it's also a really great barometer of how our voice is doing that day. So as we learn to train on this one specific routine, right? And the routine can look different for every person, right? But in general, you want the routine to start out with thin fold exercises. Gradually, over the course of the warm-up, adding weight and volume and rotation. So meaning in the beginning of the warm-up cycle, you don't start with a fully expanded pharynx because that's going to create too much pressure bringing the chords together. So you start the warm-up thin fold function. I'm just giving some examples. There's many examples, right? And then you go from there and you start to add on a little bit of open mouth singing, slightly little bit of weight, and with the little bit of weight, you're learning to turn the larynx. And so you learn to exercise the voice in that way. So long story short, let's say you've got your base routine, right? If you're doing that every day, you'll know what state your voice is in. You'll develop a relationship with your voice that is very, very specific. And so you will know, today this is happening. Today that is happening. So before an audition, it should 100% be the same so that you know where you're at, and then you know what maybe your pitfalls are that day. Because you're going to have a day where, like, one day, you know, things are working really well. Next day, things are really closed up. But then you're going to have your tools and you're going to know where you need to watch your step, right? And so if you're doing a different warm up on the day of your audition, you may not have that same understanding. Okay, now the next question. Now these questions are interesting, especially I'll end with the last one, but this is the second to last one. When are we ready to go out there? Ooh, you know, 50 years ago, I would have said, you've got to have everything in line. Everything has to be perfect and everything. And I mean, honestly, I'm just going to lay it out there. The state of the singing world is really interesting today. You have some great singing, you have some really terrible singing, and there you can see them all at the same houses, okay? And big houses, small houses, there's great singing, there's bad singing. So now I'm going to answer this from an ideal perspective, okay? Not an actual perspective. An actual perspective means kind of when you have the cojones to sort of get your package together and go out there and you think you're doing great. And that's what I would say, right? But if you really want to be systematic about it and you want to feel good about what you're doing, I think it's really important that within your repertoire, you're able to sing the iconic roles of your repertoire, right? And when I say of your repertoire, you don't need to fach yourself, okay? I'm probably going to get like canceled for saying that word and they're going to think it's something else and then I'm going to have my Instagram shut down. But you don't need to fach yourself, right? You need to find the roles that are comfortable, and probably it won't be like, you know, Queen of the Night and Brunhilde, but it could be. I'm not going to say. Maybe it is, and you know what? If it is, that's super marketable, so keep it. But you need to find that set of roles that are really comfortable, and then within that, you feel that you can sing those roles easily, like 2 days in a row. I think that's important. Not that you would want to do that ideally, right? Because there's vocal health to consider, but that you could, that it's not taxing for you, that you feel like you're really singing your Fach. You need to have an even voice bottom to top. Again, this is ideal answer. What you see on the stages out there is not necessarily this. So I don't know how to answer that, but you should ideally have an even voice bottom to top, and you feel that things are comfortable. When you're singing, you feel comfortable. And why that's so important is because if you don't feel comfortable, you can't portray the character. And so you have to be able to give brain space to that. I won't say complete brain space because that's just foolhardy. You have to have a portion of your brain, monitoring what is going on, because we're singing hard music, right? But you need to have a large portion of your brain freed up to express the text and express the character. So you got to feel good about what you're doing. And so if your technique, even if you sound great, like here's what I would say, even if you're getting amazing feedback, like, wow, you sound so great, and you feel terrible, you feel like really insecure and you're singing and it feels tense and tight and all sorts of things, you're not ready to go out there, because you know what? You're going to get out there and you might even get work. And then you're going to hate every minute of it. So that's not fun. That's not cool. And you don't want to do that, right? So that's not worth it. But in general, when are you ready to get out there? When you feel that you can meet the demands of your repertoire consistently in public. And you're not going to be everybody's cup of tea. Somebody's going to want a darker voice. Somebody's going to want a brighter voice. Somebody's going to want, more chesty low notes. Somebody's going to want more pianissimo. Like, there's so many things, and it's like, okay, you're not going to please everybody, and that is okay. There is nothing wrong with that. That does not mean that you don't sing well, and I think that's an important thing to get through your heads. There's a lot of competition out there. There's a lot of great singers, okay, and a lot of great singers that aren't singing. And you know what? If you aren't getting hired because somebody doesn't like your voice, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're a bad singer. But it doesn't necessarily mean that you don't have something to look at either. So it's important with each criticism or with each rejection that you might look at yourself and say, what can I do better? But you should be doing that anyways, with or without rejection or criticism. So basically, don't expect, even if everything is going really, really well, don't expect everybody to buy into what you're selling, right? And that is okay. Okay, and the next question is, how do we get hired? And that's just funny. I really have no idea. It's a good question. I think the state of things are very different, and I think the world is changing quite a bit. I would say, of course there is this normal path that people take, but I don't think it's so normal anymore. It's like the 22-year-old gets out of school, and gets a young artist program and then gets picked up by some IMG or something and has a huge career. It's not really happening anymore, right? But I think getting hired is, again, dependent. It's dependent partially on you, but it's really dependent on other people, and you have to see that, because if you don't see that, you're not going to believe in yourself, right? And so you have to be brutally honest with yourself. In fact, the person that should be most brutally honest with you is you. And if you haven't gotten to that point yet, then, develop a relationship with yourself that you're your biggest supporter and you're your biggest critic. And that's really the way that it should be. And then all the criticism or praise you get, you're able to sort of say, all right, I hear what you're saying. Thank you. Either way, whether it's good or bad, thank you, right? But you know what the truth is. Like, I think we've all had bad singing days and you get so much praise. I mean, I know this has happened to me. Oh, you were so wonderful. And I'm thinking, okay, thank you. Because thank you, that's nice, right? But I also am not going to take that and go, oh yeah, those problems weren't there. No, they were, right? So I think it's important that we have that relationship with ourselves. And then in terms of getting hired, honestly, I know there's a lot of competition out there, but I also think that singers don't do enough to help themselves. They kind of wait around and wish and hope and pray that maybe someone will discover them. Maybe they'll write a few agents or a few theaters. But in general, there's very few people out there that are actually being systematic in this process. And, I would say in terms of agents are great and can really help you. But also don't forget that if you don't have an agent, you don't have to wait. You know what I'm saying? You can write theaters directly. And I think think about economics right now, okay? No one's getting rich off opera. Like, let's just not kid ourselves, all right? No one is getting rich off opera. So when you think about the position of the agent, some theaters are very, very welcoming to singers without an agent, because in the end, it can mean less money that they have to pay out, that there's an exchange, right? So if you think about it in terms of economics, you can absolutely feel free to approach places. And I like, again, the topography is changing now. So I think it's very different even from when I was like a young artist coming up. I think it's very different now. But I would say if you love this art form, I love this art form. Am I singing regularly? No. I have basically cultivated my teaching career in tandem with my singing career. And you know what? Sometimes I'm singing and sometimes I'm not. And it's okay. But for me, I also know my worth. And I know that I am an excellent singer. And I feel confident that, the right opportunity shows up at the right time. And I think that's important. But I'm going to be prepared for that opportunity. And that's another piece of the puzzle. So getting hired, it's like when you are prepared, and you're prepared either with the role or vocally or whatever it is, and the opportunity comes, you're ready to jump on it. And I think that is so, so, so important. So if you believe in yourself and you believe what you're doing, make sure that you're ready. And ready can look in a million different ways, right? But you feel ready, for whatever curveball might be thrown your way. And, that can be as much as like your local opera companies are performing XYZ operas. And you say, I sing this repertoire, I sing that repertoire. Well, I'm going to get this ready just in case. Because you never know. Curtain almost goes up and the tenor's lost his voice, right? They need a new tenor. And you're ready. And you go in, right? So if you're ready, then opportunities can come your way. If you're not ready, chances are you can wish and hope and pray, but they're not going to come your way. Okay, well, thank you, everybody. I'm just going to check here, make sure I didn't miss anything. No, I think that we got all of the questions. I think we got through all of them. So this was a great conversation with you guys, and thank you for all of your questions. I hope that it was helpful, and I will talk to you all later. So please feel free to DM me if you have any follow-ups. All right. Now I'm going to try to cancel my live or exit out. I think I pressed the X. Hold on. Bye, guys. Give me an awkward second while I end the live.